The sea had a way of making steel honest. As a girl, Brienne would stand on the pale shore of Evenfall and listen to the waves unbuckle themselves against the reefs, and the wind would drum upon her helm until the world inside her visor was only breath and heartbeat and the whisper of sand carried across the courtyard. She learned to move to that rhythm, to lift and lower her sword as though it too were a tide. The old master-at-arms, a faded man with knuckles like walnuts, would tell her that the blade was a creature that asked questions. "Understand what it asks," he would say, "before you answer." She never forgot. She never hurried her answers. She watched and felt and measured. Years later, in a city of baked brick and incense, she rose in darkness and let a boy help her buckle her greaves. "Careful," Podrick whispered, when the leather strap slid against a nick in her calf. He had grown in the months since she'd taken him into her shadow. His hands were steadier, his eyes less lost. The bruised blue of dawn seeped through the shutters. Beyond, King's Landing stirred like an animal waking to the day. 1,000 throats clearing, shutters lifted, mule bells shaken, water hauled. Brienne sat quiet on the stool, while Podrick set the greave true and tied it, then crossed to fetch her blue surcoat. She had brushed it herself the night before. Even though the color had faded from so much sun and road grit, it still smelled faintly of salt. "You'll not speak," she told him gently, out of habit, though he knew. "Not unless you must. And keep your eyes for me." "Mason." "Yes, my lady." The words carried her back to another tent, another morning, a green silk pavilion in the Stormlands, when the world had smelled of apple oil and velvet, and she had bent to kiss the ring of a laughing king. The memory came as a scent first and then as weight. The ache in her chest where Renly lived, flickering. She had promised herself she would never let that grief make her slow or blind. Today was not for grief. Today was a question. In the corridor outside her cell, a lantern showed her reflection in a small looking glass. A narrow blaze of metal where her gorget clasped. Her face, always too plain, always too large, was a thing she had learned to treat as another piece of weather. There but not decisive. The only grace she allowed herself was that her hair lay flat. She had combed it until it behaved. A soldier at the end of the corridor dozed with his helmet in his lap, drooling. She passed him without sound. Podrick, padding, carried her gauntlets. They came into the inner yard of the Sept house by a side door just as the lamps were being snuffed, one by one around the cloister. The air smelled of beeswax and crushed fern. There were voices, soft and careful, at the far end of the passage, and a gleam of mail beneath white wool. Brienne slowed because it was not in her nature to stride upon vows. The man in the white cloak turned his left shoulder to her, so that the candlelight laid gold along the stump where his right hand should be. "Come," said Jaime Lannister. His voice had roughened since the days when it seemed made solely of laughter. "The old man is waiting." The old man was not old, not in the way of bones, but he had the eyes of someone who had read many names in a book that consumes them. The Septon poured a little oil into his palm and rubbed it between his fingers with a sound like paper being folded. Behind him the statue of the warrior loomed, sword bare, beneath a dust-silvered ceiling that threw back every breath as a hush. 7 thin flames trembled along the rail of the altar, and all the world beyond the chamber was closed by the weight of stone. "You need not do this," Brienne said, reflexively, because she believed that warnings were a part of honor. "If I fail, it will be said you made me a mockery. If you fail," Jaime said, "they will not need my help to say it." A tight smile pulled at one corner of his mouth. "And if you do not fail, I would have been a coward not to offer you this." He set his left hand upon her shoulder. She could feel the bones through the armor. "Kneel, if you please." She knelt. The kneeling had a rightness to it, like standing inside a memory that had waited for her precisely. The floor was cold beneath her knee, and she thought of all the stories she had stored within the latticework of her ribs. The songs of Sir Galladon and the Perfect Knight, the paragraphs about Sir Duncan, the tall that she had once heard Barristan Selmy recite, the simple verbs of a girl in blue declaring to a king that she could be his sworn sword,
The simple verbs of a girl in Bluda's sworn sword.
She had waited her whole life for the language to name the thing that she was. Jamie's words, when they came, did not have the exaggerated grandeur of the singers. They were plain words, direct and solemn, and they were the truest gift he could offer. In the sight of the father, he said, remember justice. In the sight of the mother, said the Septon, like a second heart answering, remember mercy. The warrior bids you be brave, Jamie went on. The left-hand knight with the candlelight on his jaw. The maid asks for innocence. The smith for diligence. The crone for wisdom. The stranger will have you when he will. His mouth stretched in grim humor at that. Rise then, Brienne of Tarth. When she stood, the air seemed thinner in the chapel, more exact. Sir Brienne, Jamie said, and for the first time the name did not bruise. He swore her with a light tap of steel to each shoulder. Steel with a rippling, smoky grain that caught the candlelight and drank it. Oathkeeper lay across her collarbones as if it had been waiting to be there. The blade was cool and intimate, and she felt the line of it pass through her into the floor, as if the whole city were a scabbard, and she slid true. Afterward, in the cloister, he leaned his back to the stone and regarded her with the long-lashed insolence she had grown used to. It masked the tenderness he could not forgive himself for. I cannot fight for you, he said, not with the small sword they have left me. He lifted his right arm and shook the golden hand on its loop, so that it clinked. But I can fight alongside you with words when the shouting is done. This city might yet remember what a vow is. Vows are not words, Brienne said. Not from obstinacy, but from bedrock. They are standing. That too. He pushed himself off the wall with the heel of his boot. Balin Swan will stand with you. Cersei means to call the Kettleblacks as her champions. She always did like the number 3 when useful. Meryn and Boros will come because that is what they are. As for the Tyrell boy, Loras will try to die for Renly if it means making a picture of himself. Perhaps Margaery can keep him from doing it stupidly. Brienne absorbed the tally without twitch. 7 against 7 made arithmetic of belief. And the rest? A pair of hedges are camped by the stables, Jamie said. They stink of hard bread, but their swords are clean. They claim to have ridden with you at Maidenpool and hold you true. Strongboar's in from the west to lick his lord's boots. He's as likely as a summer storm. And Hyle Hunt has a nose for being seen on the right side by women of consequence. He vexes you, I know, he added, but vexation can be convenient in a fight. I do not like being convenient, Brienne said. No one does, said Jamie. His mouth tightened and then softened again. But we use what we have. They used what they had. When she stepped out into the street that sloped to the Great Sept, the sun had begun to wipe the grime from the city's face. Whitewash glared off the walls so hard that it seemed to scrape the eye. Pipers were already piping somewhere, and a fishwife shrieked about the weight of her mackerel. Brienne hated parades of flesh, hated how the city made everything a bazaar. But there was no help for it. The trial made carnival of judgment. The small folk had learned the hour and came shouldering up from every alley, dragging children, shouting wagers, making prayers that were mostly gossip, asked to wear a better robe. They parted around her, the way water parts around a rock. To some, she was the rock. To others, she was a curiosity, something that proved their world could still surprise them. Podrick kept so close behind, she felt the warmth of him. He had scrubbed his face so hard he'd reddened it, and his hair lay like a flattened bird upon his skull. He carried her gauntlets in a cloth she had taught him to fold and refold when his hands wanted something to do. Sir, he said once under his breath, testing the syllable as if it might crack. She let it pass. She had heard the word in that chapel and accepted it into her bones. The city could be as skeptical as it liked. At the foot of the Sept steps the line of gold cloaks stood in their filed pomp, halberds slanting like wheat. Above them, the 7 crystal towers clawed at the brightening sky. The great Sept of Baelor was a ship of white and glass where prayers rose like sailcloth. Brienne had never liked it. She preferred the squat sturdiness of the Evenfall Septet, the way the arches felt like shoulders. But today the gods had chosen to be seen among opal and sunbursts, and there was an arithmetic to that as well. The High Septon waited in his rainbow vestments at the top of the steps. leaning upon a staff. His face was a pear wrinkled by thought. He blinked when Brienne bowed, and his blessing fell on her like a handkerchief, weightless. Beyond him in the nave, the Queen Regent stood with her head lifted like a blade. And beside her, the king, a soft boy in a crown too heavy for any child. And beside him, the rose that had learned to be made of iron. Marguerite Tyrell's gown was thin enough to admit the sun. When she smiled at Brienne, it was with the expression of a woman in a box with glass sides. Part show, part prayer. She inclined her head, barely, so that her hair, dark honey that morning, slid against her cheek. Loras was half a step behind his sister, all silver and shadow, and he would not look at Brienne. There were hollows beneath his eyes. Meryn Trant looked like a satchel, Boros Blount like an onion. The Kettleblacks, 3 in a row, smirked as if someone had told them a jest too filthy to share aloud. "Let it be said," the High Septon intoned, "that the gods are called upon not to entertain the multitude, but to reveal their justice." He followed this with a prayer that was also a list of titles, and a declaration of formal complaint. That Brienne of Tarth had been accused of abetting treason, of plotting with enemies of the crown, of false witness, of murder done by stealth and sorcery. He did not name Renly. It hung in the air anyway, like perfume. "I deny it," Brienne said. She had considered a longer speech, but when she breathed the words, they came out like hammered iron. "I asked the gods for judgment." "The ancient way," said the High Septon, and something like eagerness flickered through the small folk. They were in the story now. 11 bells clanged. The city's pigeons startled up in a clatter and turned as one like a gray river trying to find its course in the sky. They set the field upon the wide square before the steps, roping off the cobbles and covering them in sand. The sand was pale as bread under flour. Squires brought helms and shields. The champions were named. Balin Swan came in white, his helm under his arm, his face composed so tenderly it might have been carved from milk. Strongbor lumbered in with his boar's head grin, and the vigor of a man who loves the world too much to be careful with it. Sir Hyla Hunt arrived late and bowed to Brienne like a man who knows he is a fool, and is only trying not to be a lout as well. The hedges she remembered from the roadhouse, Creighton Longbow with his odd courtly flourishes, Illifer with his rope belt and hungry eyes, made their way to her and stood to either side, their armor patched, their swords lovingly plain. A warrior's son, a spare thorn of a man with a mouth like a latch, asked the High Septon's leave to stand in the name of the 7 for any accused who had no kin, and he was given it. His name was Sir Theomore, it turned out, and he had a scar under his left eye, like a question mark. The Septon drew a line of oil upon each of their foreheads that gleamed and then evaporated in the heat. Brienne had no sigil to cover the blue of her surcoat. She took the shield Podrick handed her, painted with her house arms, the island like a tear upon a field of sunset, and slung it onto her harness. Oathkeeper lay easy in her left hand, heavy and calm. She closed her fingers and felt the ridges of the leather grip warm to her. Across the sand, Cersei's champions arrayed themselves like a bad dream about order. The 3 Kettleblacks made a ladder of their long faces. Meryn Trant tested the edge of his sword with the pad of his thumb and licked the blood away. Boros Blount yawned. He could not keep it in. And Loras Tyrell stepped into the light not in a riot of flowers, but in a quiet gray, and Brienne loved him for that, even as she knew he wanted her death. Her breath measured the space between bells. The rules were spoken. 7 thin flags were driven into the sand, 1 for each life, and the crowd fell into that river hush that runs before a killing begins. She drew her helm down, and the world became a circle and a tunnel, and the leather inside the cheekpieces smelled faintly of rosemary oil and iron. She could see the quiver of heat above the sand. She put her shield up and saw nothing but a painted sunset, and a small seam of bright where the edge of the shield did not fully meet her visor. There was a scrape of boot on sand to her right, Strongbor eager, shifting, and then a sound like rain when the first strokes met. Illifer hissed something like a prayer and fell into his old habit of spitting to one side. Creighton made a courtly salute to his opponent and almost lost his head for it. Brienne did not move until movement was called for. Meryn Trant came into her circle too soon. Spear jab quick, even with a sword. He had counted upon her size to bring her forward. She let him come, and let his sword ring upon her shield, and let the blow travel through bone and muscle into earth. Then she answered. What a blade asks, what an arm answers. This she had learned on the shore with the waves making their catechism. Meryn came too far with his shoulder. She stole half a step left and let his point drag. An Oathkeeper slid over the top of his edge in a gift of fraction and cut clean across his forearm, where the vambrace did not wholly guard. He made a noise like a cough. Blood came welling black-red, lazy at first, then in little pulses that made the sand drink faster. He tried to take the measure anew. She would not allow it. 2 beats, then 3, the way a dancer will not be thrown from her footwork, and she pressed him back toward the flags. He never looked over his shoulder. Men like Meryn do not consider the banners until they find themselves under one. He was not a poor swordsman. 3 times he met her with the correct answer and almost baited her into pride. She starved the pride. On the 4th, she let him think he had her weight, and then twisted, taking the blow on her shoulder so it screamed through the padding. And she slapped his blade with her shield's rim. It is an ugly motion when done clumsily and a beautiful one when timed. It left him snarling, his sword 2 handspans out of line, his stance a word misspelled, and she cut again, the shortest stroke, hardly any muscle, and laid open the meat beneath his collarbone. He fell with a grunt that was mostly surprise. She did not look to see if he would rise. When she had first learned to fight, she had looked and been punished. The world's forgiveness, she had discovered, is not a thing to count on. Beyond the rim of her helm, the battle had resolved into a scatter of private arguments. Boros Blount had found himself facing Strongbor, which was its own form of judgment. The Kettleblacks swarmed like dogs that never imagined the boar might turn. Loras had chosen Balin's Swan, and the 2 of them made a moving circle of light and answer, like boys learning the letters of each other's names. Ser Theomore had been wounded early. The blood on his face made his scar into an exclamation. Creighton Longbow took a cut on the thigh and gave a flourish as if he meant to reassure an audience that was not there. Illifer fought like a man who had lived too long on too little. Economical, calculating, cruelly patient. Hyle Hunt discovered that his opponent, Osney, Brienne thought it was, enjoyed a bellowed taunt more than the use of his eyes. Hyle gave him the taunt like a sweet, and then, while the smirk was still blooming, slashed the lip so that the smirk became a howl. The crowd loved that. The crowd loved the show. Brienne refused the crowd. When the Kettleblack who had been circling toward her, Osred thick through the neck, committed his weight with a low hack for her knee, she cut down with Oathkeeper and took his sword near to the hilt. He yanked to free it and found the blade trapped. She stepped into him with the blunt shield edge, the way her old master-at-arms had taught her to step into a door that sticks, and the breath left him in a rush. The heel of her boot found his instep, felt it fold, and then the pommel drove the lesson home against the ridge of his helm. He went down convulsively. She gave him mercy in the only coin battle accepts. She did not kill him when killing would have been easy. It is possible the gods noticed. It is possible they never do. The sun climbed. Sweat became a map upon her, measuring every crease, salt stinging where leather had rubbed her raw. Once she nearly tripped over a banner pole and bit her tongue hard enough to taste metal. The roar that had been the city became under and over with each breath, until the only true sound was the question Oathkeeper asked when it struck or did not strike. In the end, she came face to face with Loras because it had always been going to be so. He had lost his helm. His hair, sticky with dust, clung to his brow. When he smiled at her, it was like a prayer to a god he did not believe in and could not help speaking to. For him, he said. For him, she said, and they brought their swords up as if they were making a salute over a grave. Loras was quickness married to perception. He had the knack of seeing the shape of an answer and placing his foot upon it exactly. She had seen him fight before and had loved his grace. Grace must be resisted. She kept her guard high and wide, made her defense ugly, smothered his lyricism with what Jaime had once called her farmer's honesty. He made her bleed in 3 places. 1 over the left ribs, 1 along the inside of her right elbow, a sting across the knuckles where Oathkeeper's guard had not quite caught the bite of his steel. She made him tired. There are 1,000 romances about heroes who win because they are beautiful, and almost as many about those who win because they are angry. There are very few songs about the ones who win because they simply endure the length of the day. Brienne cultivated silence around her breath, gave her knees their work to do, made each parry a tax he had to pay to continue being the man he had been at dawn. Twice she nearly had him, then let him slip, because something in her refused to make his death small. The 3rd time she did not refuse. The mortal world reduces itself to inches when it wishes to be simple. A miscalculation of distance, a heel that finds no purchase, a flinch half a heartbeat late. Loras recovered from the flinch because generational training had taught his bones to cover a multitude of sins. But he did not recover from the patch of sand that slid as he adjusted. He staggered. She was upon him before his balance could return. Oathkeeper rang upon his shoulder, and his sword went wide, and she set the rim of her shield against his chest and drove. And he went to the sand with the sound of a man being invited to a story he had never wanted to be part of. He looked up at her. The sunlight put a halo of dust around his face. His mouth had gone pale. Blood traced his lower lip. He did not ask for quarter because that is not how he had been trained, and she did not demand it because something in her, hard as ironwood, refused to steal from him the thing he could lose willingly. For him, he said again, and turned his head to bare his throat. No, she said, but the word was to the world at large. She set the tip of Oathkeeper to his mantle and pressed until the cloth parted without blood. The blade rested against the delicate column where pulse lived. There she held it, a long moment that made the crowd insane with uncertainty. It was the High Septon who ended it, unexpectedly, with a raised palm and a voice that cut like a clear bell. Enough, he said. He did not speak to Brienne. He spoke to the gods, perhaps, or to the superstition of thousands. The 7 have had their spectacle. The judgment is plain. She lifted the sword. Loras closed his eyes. He began to cry, which dismayed her more than any wound. The Kettleblacks were down, 2 of them groaning, 1 dead. Meryn Trant lay on his side with the sand turned black under him. Boros Blount had lost 3 teeth and was trying to gather them from the sand as if they were coins he could not afford to be parted from. Strongbor was bleeding happily and trying to pull a splinter out of his palm with his teeth. Sir Theomore had knelt to pray and left a little puddle of red where his knee had been. Brienne stood breathing. The world came back in pieces. The king's face, very white. Cersei's mouth, very thin. Margaery's hand, the fingers gnawed at the knuckles. The High Septon's staff upon the stone. Gods have judged, he said. Brienne of Tarth is innocent in their sight. There was a sound then like the city deciding something about itself for a day. The shouting ran up the steps and down the street and out toward the fish market and the river and the hill of Rainey's. For a breath, nothing that happened could be called anything but relief. Brienne let her head drop. Inside the helm, it was very dark and very small. When she lifted it again, Jaime Lannister was halfway down the steps, moving with a will that made light contempt of his limitations. He looked as if he meant to retrieve a thing from a fire. Cersei got there first, because her life had taught her to occupy any space before someone else did. She did not step onto the sand. She did not need to. Her gaze went past Brienne to the ragged ruin that had been her champion's, and then returned with all the heat of a knife. "A pretty show," she said. "But we know what shows are." She looked at the boy by her side, the king whose hand she had never let go of, and for an instant, Brienne saw the crushing terror under the polish. The knowledge of a woman who realized the crowd had loved a story that was not hers. Jaime's voice was mild, and therefore terrible. "The gods have judged," he said. "You taught me those words. Do you remember?" Cersei's hand tightened upon the boy's fingers until he flinched. Margaery moved a fraction, that courtly shift of a woman whose entire life had been an exercise in noticing flinches. "The gods have judged," echoed the High Septon. with a satisfaction that had nothing of joy in it. It sounded like an account put right. It should have ended there, in a city that was not yet finished with its hunger. It did not. A dart of motion broke loose from the motley of servants and onlookers at the base of the steps. A thin man in household livery no one loved enough to notice. His hat slashed with green as if to proclaim a loyalty he hoped would shield him. He had a knife. He had a course. He had all the desperation of a man who believed he was 2 seconds and a lucky stroke away from changing his fate forever. Brienne saw him because the world had been her training ground in noticing what others despised. He came up at the boy from the side where Cersei's body could not block him. Brienne moved, and the move was not graceful. She put her blue bulk between and took the knife in the meat of her left arm, where her gorget ended. She did not think. Thinking was for afterward. She pivoted and struck the man across the face with the back edge of the shield. The same ugly motion a second time today. Felt the crunch, felt the weight leave his legs. Balin Swan, who had been watching the crowd with the patience of a priest, was there then, swift as the seal on a jar, and had the man by the wrist. He took the knife out of him carefully, the way a midwife might take a thorn out of a child. Strongbor laughed. The gold cloaks suddenly remembered they had halberds. Blood ran down Brienne's forearm, hot as truth. The boy looked up at her with that stunned open face only children have when they have just survived a thing they did not fully understand. Cersei stared, and for an instant the hatred fell away. And there was only calculation, bright and cold. She saw a story slipping out of her hands and tried to seize the next one. My son will not be guarded by Tommen, said Marguerite gently. Your Grace, the Seven sent us their will. She had never looked more beautiful than she did then. Her voice pitched to meet the boy and not the mother. Sir Brienne saved you. The boy's mouth worked. He was trying to swallow a heart too large. Thank you, he said to Brienne. He said it not to be clever, but because he meant it. That made it heavy. Jaime's eyes went down to the blood on her arm and back to her face. You will sit, he told her. You do not argue with me, sir, when I am playing the maester. He tore a strip from his white cloak with his teeth and bound her up with a competence and a roughness that felt achingly familiar now. Do not scowl, he added. It suits you too well for a day when I want you to be likable. The laughter that answered that was clean. It washed over the square in the quiet afterward of violence, the way water will run in a rill where the ground gives it leave. Cersei's face had become a mask carved so well it no longer allowed room for blood. She held the boy's hand as if she might anchor him through the sheer force of her grip. Marguerite gazed at Brienne with an expression that had the peculiar tautness of gratitude held in a corset of politics. The High Septon made a pronouncement. The city made arrangements to sweep up its blood and be temples again. Squires came with basins. A woman with bread on a tray realized suddenly that she had come to sell bread to a battle, and laughed until she had to lean upon her knees. Podrick wept without being loud about it and wiped his face with his sleeve as if it had been rain. By the time the sun had moved an hour, Brienne found herself standing in the cool of a small courtyard inside the Red Keep, her arm re-wrapped, while 3 men and a girl of roses discussed whether the color of a cloak could make a truth palatable. The White Sword Tower had always seemed to her like a kind of lighthouse. From its windows, the city spread like a restless sea. Jaime had brought her there without comment, and had laid his hand, his left hand, upon the smooth stone of the White Book, as you might lay a hand upon a sleeping child's forehead to judge the fever. Lord Commander, Marguerite said. She spoke to Jaime first, because that was how the world had taught her to make her way through men. The boy saw. So did the city. They will be comforted if we make a show of believing in the things they want to believe in. Jaime's smile was not unkind. We are discussing whether to give the city a story it can love and call that justice. Why not be honest and say so? Marguerite's mouth flattened. If the story is also true, Lord Commander, I do not see the harm. Jaime looked to Brienne. He had used her name like a talisman in the chapel. Now he set it aside and regarded her squarely as if there were no excuse for pretense between them. They will offer you a white cloak, he said. Cersei will gnash her teeth to the roots over it, And then she will discover a way to weaponize the gesture, which she does with everything. The boy will be proud. Marguerite will tell him pride is not a sin if he is proud of the right things. You will wear the cloak as if it were another vow you have to carry, and I will not say you are wrong. Brienne felt the weight of the word before he said it. She had thought once that a white cloak was the end of a road. Now she understood it as another road entirely. If offered, she said, measured and plain, I will take it. Not simply a white cloak, Marguerite said, and her eyes were as frank as a sister's. Her hands lay on the table between them, clasped tight enough to blanch the knuckles. The white cloak, Lord Commander. Brienne did not blink. In her chest, something heavy shifted, a grinding and a realignment, like a boulder finally sitting where it has always meant to. Jaime lifted an eyebrow. You mean to take my chair and give it to her? I mean, Marguerite said, unflinching, to ask you if your oath would be better spent as a sword in the field where the boy cannot go, and where you can do what needs doing that has no place in a white book. I mean to ask if your life might be better lived in motion with that. She nodded, not unkindly, toward the gold hand lying on the table like a gaudy paperweight. You cannot be what you were. And here she looked at Brienne with a softness that was not a trick, can be exactly what she was born to be. Jaime turned to the window. The day swam on the city like heat on water. He had always loved the vantage of height. It made his secret feel briefly like a kind of victory. I could refuse, he said, but the words lacked posture. I could cling. He thought of pages he had read, names that swam with ink and glory. He thought of a boy with a crown and a terror's eyes. He thought of his sister's mouth when she said mine. Then he laughed, low and genuine. I am tired of being a story. Let the book have a page worth reading. Mend. He turned back, and there was something newly vacant in him. And in that vacancy, an ease Brienne had not seen before. Take it, he told her simply. And do not spoil what you are by asking permission from any of us a second time. It was not a ceremonial appointment that followed, not with trumpets and banners. The city had already had its show for one day. The jesters and the criers would feast on it for a week. The deed itself was quiet, as vows should be. In the white-walled room, with its long, narrow windows that made the light into spears, the boy king pressed the hilt of a ceremonial sword into Brienne's palm with both of his hands, because the thing was heavy for him, and said in a voice that shook, "Guard me." "I will," said Brienne. It was not beautiful. It was only true. Cersei's yaw worked as if she were chewing bones. She could not prevent it now without denying the gods themselves, which she did as a matter of course, but preferred to do subtly. She settled for stipulating that the Septons must bless the choice, as if holiness might inoculate her against humiliation. The High Septon intoned again. The city yawned again. And in the depth of the White Sword Tower, Brienne hung her newly bleached cloak where the sun could find it and dry it of the damp that had lived there while others had worn it. She slept that first night with the weight of the cloak lying across the foot of her bed like snow, as if it were its own creature. She dreamed the sea was inside the room, up to her knees, cool and steady, and that the tide stole back, took her old name with it, and returned with another, laying it like a shell upon her pillow. When she woke, she did not remember the syllables of the dream, only the sense of being called to stand. The days thereafter acquired the patience of habit. She understood early that leading was not a matter of ordering men as one orders soup and expecting it to arrive hot. It was the mathematics of watch lists and the humility of knowing each man's limit and the cruel charity of asking him to step precisely to it and not beyond. Brienne began to wake before the sun. Though she might walk the parapets at the hour when the gulls merely muttered, when the city was all roofs and smoke and speculation, the White Cloaks learned they would be measured by her in ways no one had thought to measure them before. Not only by their sword strokes, but by the quiet hours when nothing happened and they did not permit their boredom to become a danger. Balin Swan took instruction the way water takes the shape of a cup and gave it back clearer. He accepted that the way he carried his weight had always been half a syllable wrong and corrected it without pride. Strongbor, whom she perhaps should not have kept and did anyway, loved being told a thing was impossible. She found for him the impossible that kept him sober. Hyle Hunt, vexing as a persistent fly with a decent heart beneath it, took her scoldings better than he took her praise. It made her resolve to give him more of the latter in a parsimony that made him earn it. Osmond Kettleblack was gone from the guard by a method that smelled of the Queen Regent's preference for removing obstacles by creating entirely new roads. Boris Blount wore his bruises like a story that made him bitter. He sulked as a child sulks. So Brienne set him to duties where sulking would mean boredom, and boredom would mean shame. He learned. Men can. It astonished her every time, which she hid because astonishment is not leadership. In the afternoons she stood in the yard where sunlight fell in bars like judgment and made the white cloak into an accusation. She taught and was taught by the way men failed. The children of the keep, scullery boys, the daughter of the armorer, a girl of 9 who chased chickens like a profession, began to gather at the edge of the yard to watch her and then tried to mimic her with sticks. Brienne pretended not to see them and made her footwork exact in case anyone invisible was learning. When the day ended, she climbed the narrow stair to the room where the white book lay upon its dais. The book that had made her as shy as a girl listening outside a door so she might hear a song. She opened the blank pages. It is the terror of any life, that the place where one's deeds go will remain white forever. She read backward, the way one does to teach oneself to be humble. Barriston's page, elegant and severe. Dunk the lunk, thick of trunk. The penmanship untidy with feeling. She traced a letter without touching it. Jamie stood in the doorway once and said nothing. It is a grace of his, she discovered, that he had learned when silence was the only argument worth offering. In that quiet was a rumor of winter. The city talked in taverns about a frost that had clung to the morning buckets one day longer than it should. Men who made their living off petty prophecy began to sell talismans against wolves. A woman brought a bundle of sad little bones to the gate and claimed they were a sign. Podrick brought her a cup of beer and took away the bones. They were chicken, he told Brienne shyly, as though this simple priesthood might embarrass the gods. Letters came, as they always do, because men believe paper is magic that can move fate across distance. One of them had a broken seal with the faint far smell of spruce clinging to it. The hand was crabbed as a winter-bent hedge. Lady Brienne, it said. A girl with hair colored not by nature but by despair was seen near the inn at the crossroads in the company of a brutish man. One ear seemed torn, who spoke of the Trident as if it were not a river but a road he owned. Brienne sat holding the words until the candle guttered and threw a runnel of wax onto the table's edge. She had vowed. She had become the meaning of oath. Her life was now a geometry of duties that intersected like streets in a city that had grown without plan. The girl's name burned behind every other thought like a hearth you cannot quite leave. She found Podrick's eyes and saw the same flame there. She found Margaery's and found, in addition to all the cunning, a deep pity for a bird that had never been taught the trick of flying. She found Jamie's and found in them an acknowledgement that the world sometimes demands coins you have already spent. You cannot go, the Queen Regent told her, when at last she asked leave to follow windblown rumor. Cersei's mouth smiled. You are the boy's armor now. If someone steals the armor to go south, then all that arrives is a thief. Then I will send what I can, Brienne replied politely. She had learned that there are battles you do not win with blades. I have men who can be spared. The oath is mine, but duty has hands. She thought of Strongbor, who would chase any rumor for the pleasure of finding it false. Of Hyle, whose vanity might be harnessed to something like virtue if he could persuade himself he had discovered it on his own. Of Podrick, who would go wherever she asked him to go because he had decided that his life was made better by standing where she stood. You will not send the squire, Cersei said at once, as if plucking the thought from her skull. The boy is loyal to you beyond reason. We keep such loyalties where we can see them. Margaery spoke first, because her gift was to use her voice the way a healer uses a needle. Podrick, May escort a letter, if it pleases you, your grace. The rest can be left to men who will be grateful for the task." She glanced toward Brienne. Between them passed the tiniest of nods. So small, it might have been mistaken for the drift of breath. The city is a theater. Women become stagecraft to survive it. So Strongborough went, clinking and pleased. Hyle Hunt went, with a promise to return with either news or a good excuse. Creighton and Elifer, who had not expected their loyalty to be anything but an afternoon in the sun, were pressed into the Queen's service in a way that allowed them to declare they were keeping a promise to themselves. Brienne stood at the gate and watched them become small upon the road like thoughts moving across a brow. She herself went to the parapets and made the pattern of the day repeat as it should, because repetition is a spell you cast upon your dread. At night she dreamed the sea again. She dreamed she rose out of it dripping and found the white book on the shore, heavy as driftwood, and when she opened it the pages were wet and the ink ran so that every name became a river and every deed a fish passing under her hand. She woke and sat long with the book open to a blank page. The city breathed. Somewhere a man sang an obscene song with melancholy tenderness. She dipped her pen and wrote a single line in a steady hand that surprised her with its calm. Sir Brienne of Tarth took upon herself the white cloak in the reign of Tommen of House Baratheon and kept her oath. She stopped. She blew the sand upon the ink and watched it dry. She did not write what she had done, because that is for others to do if it is to mean anything. She wrote only what was true and would be true if she held to it. Kept her oath. In the yard the next morning, Balin Swan slid his foot a fraction more true and smiled that small smile he kept for the things that satisfied him. Podrick brought her a cup of watered wine, beaming as if he had been knighted by being allowed to carry it. A raven came at noon, shedding one black feather like a dropped word as it circled to perch. It bore nothing of the girl, only a list of prices men had made of other men. The winter rumor thickened. The city made small economies against cold. Cersei's eyes were knives that had discovered there were metals they could not cut. Jaime was gone 2 days later with 500 men, as Marjorie had thought he might be, sent to make Lannister justice in a field where such justice had always grown more easily than in a tower. Brienne moved from hour to hour inside the roll, until the roll became her new shape. When she climbed the tower at dusk, she found the city no less ugly and no less beautiful than it had been. The gulls fought and were ungainly. Then they opened their wings and made of awkwardness something like grace. The lamps came on. The bells counted a moment that belonged to itself and to the unknown future. On one of those evenings when the heat loosened its grip for an hour, she stood above the yard and watched Podrick run through the pattern she had set him. Thrust, recover, sweep, recover, and felt a steadiness in her that did not depend upon victory. Oathkeeper rested upon the table inside within arm's reach, its smoky grain dull in the last of the light. The city shouted, and then laughed, and then fell into its own secretive murmur. Below, a child, the armorer's small daughter, the one who chased chickens, dragged a stick through the dust and made a long wavering line. She stepped back to admire it, then frowned and straightened, and drew the line again, a little truer. Brienne found herself smiling. She went inside to open the book and lay her palm upon a page she meant to keep empty until there was something worthy to stain it. The page stayed blank in the fall of evening, as white as a promise, as white as a cloak drying in a clean wind. K. The first days taught her that a city can be made to obey a rhythm if you set it and keep to it with unembarrassed stubbornness. She woke in the blue hour before dawn, when the gulls were still only murmurs on the wind and the braziers hissed softly where dew found them. She walked the perimeter alone before the guard's change, boots careful on the stairs that curled like a shell, gauntlet just grazing the roughness of stone at each turn the way a swimmer's hand will brush a pool's edge. It steadied her. The city below had not yet put its mask on. The river lay like a dull strip of metal, and the masts were a forest of black vertebrae. Dogs barked in ones and twos. Smoke rose clean, unperfumed by meat or onions. She carried no spear then, and kept her cloak gathered in one fist so it would not whisper. If any man challenged, she gave him the password, in the quiet voice of a woman who has not lost the habit of being doubted and refuses to dignify it with pain. By the time the sun shouldered up over the crown of the sept, she was already in the yard with a practice blade, the white cloak unpinned and folded on a bench to keep it from dust. Balin Swan arrived precisely when she had asked him to, and Hyle Hunt 5 breaths after, attempting casualness and failing. Strongbor came with a lopsided grin and a cut on his ear that had not been there the day before. When she lifted an eyebrow, he said nothing, which was better than a joke. Podrick ran the markers in the half-shade with his cheeks set, speaking the names of each step under his breath in his schoolboy voice. Recover, slip, guard, turn, as if reciting a catechism. Again, she said when the line faltered. Hyle's mouth twitched toward wit. She looked at him until it smoothed. In the afternoon, she made the rounds with lists. She had never understood how a sword could weigh so little compared to a wax tablet, and the burden of knowing what each name upon it might mean to a child's supper or a mother's fear. The Kitchens liked her, not because she joked with them. She did not, but because she saw each scullion by face and learned which boy would eat the raisins before he got them to the bread, and which girl flinched when a pot clanged. She walked the armory with the master smith and asked him to show her how the hinges were greased, which set him into a rapture of explanation and made him forget to be bruised by the sight of a woman who knew what a rivet should feel like. She paced the eastern wall at dusk and counted the coin lanterns on the far side of the river, because a city's truth is partly written in how it spends light. She spoke to the day's captain without taking his chair, because chairs breed delicate resentments, and she could not afford them. In the white book room and at night, after the torches in the long corridor had been snuffed one by one, and the shadows lay in obedient lines, she would lift the book's cover with both hands every time. The heft of it carried a consequence it seemed to draw into the sinew of her arms. Leather creaked. The pages breathed a little when you fanned them. The faint ash scent of ground bones and a tempering sweetness like dried pear. She read until her eyes pricked, and then read past the prick, because someone had to remember that words could be made to carry weight as armor does. She found herself returning to Barristan's page more than she meant to. The hand was neat, the record long, the tone modest to a fault. Yet between the strokes there was the pride of a man who believed that fidelity could be beautiful. She took that into her like a draught of cold water after salt. When she could not bear the book, she went to the little window and leaned the quiet of her skull against the stone, and let the breeze lift the hair that had escaped her plait. The city murmured. Below, in some court, someone learned a tune wrong, and learned it again, and then learned it with feeling, and then ruined it, and laughter broke out, and the laughter healed the tune. She thought of the sea. She thought of Evenfall's shore where the reef teeth caught the waves and then let them go, where she had learned to read questions in their break and answer them with her weight and the angle of her shoulder. The world here had different questions. That was all. 2 days after the trial, the man who had rushed the king died of a fever in the dungeon. Balin Swan said it with the even voice of someone who has learned not to make theater of these reports. Brienne nodded and asked about his hands. Blisters under the calluses, Balin said, thinking aloud with his palm flattened on the table, as if the wood helped him reckon. Not a cut-purse's hands, not a mason's. A rower would have callus at the base of the fingers, a sailor more upon the heel of the hand. He turned his own palm to show the map of it, pale ridges and thin lines. The man's ring finger on the right shows an old indent. He wore a band for years, and had it off long enough the groove had begun to soften. Numb? Married? Hyle said from the doorway, where he had drifted in with the talent of men who mean to be included, and pretend that inclusion is a surprise. Or sworn, Balin said. Some livery. The strip upon his cap, green. Half this city wears green since the roses brought their gardeners south. Hyle said. Not this green, Balin answered. And the small exactness of his voice made Brienne look at him more closely. His grace lay in detail. A dye that bites too shallow, used by men who do not pay for depth. Spun in Lannisport or Gulltown, I'd say. Old cloth. New slash. If he wished to resemble a Tyrol creature, he chose the wrong thread. Then the wrong shade can be the right shade if you care more for the tale than the truth. Brienne said. She thought of Cersei's mouth like a blade. Do we know who let him close? Gold cloaks at the third rank, Balin said. The boy had moved. He chose his words. Unpredictably. And the crowd loved you for a moment, as if they believed loving anything might save them from themselves. Men's eyes go where other people's eyes point. He took the space given. General. Names, Brienne said. We have them, he said. We will not break them. We will move them to knights along the river where they will learn to be cold. If they cannot learn, we will give them different work where the city's forgiving of failure. And the green? Hyle asked. Gull Town, you said. One-eared men with cheap dyes. Balin smiled without pride. I said the thread was wrong. The man may be right from any direction. But he carried a knife of Old Town make, the temper tells. If you care to look. That could be bought anywhere a ship makes harbor. He paused. But the thong that laced it to his wrist, those knots were sailors' knots. You know them or you do not. You cannot half know them. Brienne touched her wounded arm and felt the throb as a statement. Very well. We write to the harbor master. Quietly. And we post eyes at the quays that can tell a fisherman from a cellar rat made to look like one. Podrick was already up from his stool, ink-stained. His face had acquired the bright attentiveness of a hound who has learned he can be trusted not to bolt. Sir. Your map, she said. I want it marked with every place a man can stand and see the king upon the steps. I want it marked with the stair corners where a boy can spill a basket and make men look. I want the drains where a rat might come and go and keep his whiskers clean. I want the bakeries, Podrick said, flushing with pride, where men line for warm bread and do not think of anything else. Yes, he said simply. He had found it on his own. He should have the clean coin of being told that. Hyle rocked on his heels, a boy's motion ill-fitting in a man. And the queen? He said lightly, and made it a jape at his own expense before anyone else could make it a reprimand at theirs. Does she take the news that a stranger's blade came near her blood and was turned by a woman she despises any better with a day between? Her Grace is considering a new arrangement for my men, Brienne said. She kept the dryness from her tone with care. She would distribute us so that the king's mother, the king's uncles, the king's cousins, the king's cats, and the king's smell are guarded each by their own. I advised her that my oath is to the boy himself and the seat in which he sits. She advised me that she has more experience than I do in what men will stand and what they will not. Ben? And what will you stand? Hyle asked, not quite impudent. I will stand where I should, she said, and make it be the right place by standing there. Strongbor laughed, the booming sound bowling into the room and rattling the cups. Saint's bones, Tarth. You make stubbornness sound like a sermon I can drink to. He clapped Balin's shoulder with an affection that would have toppled a lesser man. When do I go hunting your one-eared sailor? You go nowhere until you have learned to keep your feet under you when a priest walks past, Brienne said. And his grin widened because he liked rules that sounded like stories. She visited Loras Tyrell 3 times before he would look at her without flinching. The sept where they kept the wounded was small and white and smelled of vinegar and clean linen. Marguerite had arranged for the care with all the gentle iron she possessed. The sisters moved there like a flock of doves that knew exactly how to fly in a storm. On the first day, Loras stared at the ceiling and let her stand beside his bed in silence until he turned his head away. On the second, she spoke of Renly, only one thing, the way his laugh had a catch in it, when he found himself unexpectedly pleased. That made the boy blink, and that was all. On the third, when she came, he had washed, and his hair lay in a careful line. He made himself meet her eye with an effort that moved her more than Grace had ever done. I did not die for him, he said. No. She agreed. You lived for him. He swallowed. It hurt him. It felt like the smaller thing. Among men, she said. Not among oaths. He would have liked you better than he liked me, Loras said. And when she would have denied it, he lifted one hand, his right, clean-banded now, palm up. He would have liked you because you made him honest, which he had not learned to be. With me, he was the boy we both liked to be. I would have liked him better alive," she answered, and that was as far as either of them would go that day toward tenderness. He shut his eyes and breathed through his nose. She left him, and Marguerite was in the corridor with her hands clenched at her waist, the corners of her mouth not trembling because she had taught them not to. The two women looked at each other a long moment in the light falling from the domed ceiling, and then walked on together without needing to prove anything. "Sir Brienne," Marguerite said when they had gone a little way, "there will be prayers at the Great Sept tomorrow at noon, a modest thing for the Bakers' Guild. But the High Septon has asked that the boy attend and be seen. He thinks a king should smell a flower now and then. He is not wrong." "And no, he is not a fool," Brienne said. "No," Marguerite said with a softness that sounded, for a breath, like pity. "But there are men under him who like sheep shears too much because they make them feel like shepherds." She glanced sideways. "Your men will make friends among the warriors' sons if they can. They will not kneel to them," Brienne said. "No," Marguerite answered, and the single word carried a small gratitude angled like a blade. The noon prayer went off, to everyone's surprise, without a riot, which only meant that the city was saving its breath. Brienne had mapped the routes with Podrick's neat little marks and given Strongbor a job that required carrying a great deal of dignity. He rose to it the way a stone rises to the occasion of being asked to hold up a building. The High Septon made a sermon about bread and the Father's scales. Tommen looked at the loaves with an expression like tears held in check, because there were children his age with faces like drifting smoke. Marguerite saw them and moved one foot and then the other, and became woman and queen simultaneously, with a craft that almost made Brienne love her. The warriors' sons kept their distance with great show and little goodwill. Sir Theomore, the spare thorn of a man with the scar under his eye, was among them, and his glance at Brienne over the bows of the worshippers held nothing unclean in it. He had the look of a man who held hunger and did not pretend otherwise. When the king turned to go, a woman with a dull coin in her fist squeaked like a hare and flung the coin at the hem of his robe as if that could buy a blessing. Brienne's hand moved without moving. It is possible no one saw. After, in the shade of the colonnade, she found Balin's swan with a folded message. From the harbormaster, 2 men with torn ears. He tapped the parchment. "There are 5 dozen such, if every wharf tale is true. But a galley shipped in from Old Town last week. 2 oarsmen deserted, and one was seen later drunk in a wine shop off the Ragmen's Way trying to sell the thong from his knife as if it were gold. The other went aboard a riverboat bound for the Blackwater with a purse that did not belong to him. Names? None that will stand. The wine shop woman calls them, you to all men and dog to those who do not tip. The riverboat's master died of the flux on the 2nd day, and his mate says he remembers no one with ears at all, for he cannot remember a man's face unless he has cheated him at dice." Balon folded the paper again. "We will find them by their shadows, if we do at all." "You will find them," Brienne said. "Or you will find who sent them and make me understand why their thread was wrong." Her arm itched beneath the bandage. A bruise came and went in a slow map of yellow and green. That night Jamie's raven came, dropping one black feather that twirled to the sill like someone's thought of a sorrow. The parchment smelled faintly of smoke. She did not know if it was the Riverlands or his hand. The writing had lost none of its bite and all of its swagger. It felt like a man who had decided he could not carry both things and had thrown the wrong one away for too long. He wrote little of himself and less of his sister. He wrote of bridges and whether men remembered how to make them strong. Of inns where no one trusted that ale had not turned because a boy with hollow cheeks had come to drink there once and never left. Of an old man who would not stop telling him that Sir Arthur Dane had been taller. In the margin, a small drawing of a hand, not gold, holding a seedling with roots. It was not art, but it was patient. She read it 3 times and put it away without letting her mouth make a shape that might have been a smile. The city, which has a genius for sniffing a new current, began to alter itself to Brienne's presence as a river changes its surface briefly around a pillar, but does not cease to be a river. Squires stopped trying to make themselves small by laughing loudly. The White Sword Tower's steps were swept twice as often, and the boys who did it made a game of the corners, because she had noticed when corners were neglected. The Bakers' Guild sent a heavy, humble loaf every third day, and Podrick thanked them with such dignity they began to write little men with sword capes and flour upon the crusts. The gold cloaks, whose captaincy changed so often it felt like a game played by a drunk with a fistful of names, started posting one man any hour of the day at the back stairs to the tower, and that man learned he would be made to recite the oath to a loaf if he could not speak it to a lord. Cersei noticed none of it, or all of it, which amounted to the same thing given what she valued. She sent for Brienne to inform her that the king would attend a feast for the new archers of the guild 3 evenings hence, and to add that the boy must look splendid enough to shame any who came in wool. She suggested, smiling, that the woman of Tarth might consider a gown occasionally, if only to make plain that the court could be gracious to those who amused it. Brienne bowed and did not argue. The gift of not arguing is a sword that wears no sheath and must be carried with discipline to keep from cutting indiscriminately. The queen then mentioned the faith again with an airy contempt that did not hide its fear. She had reaffirmed the old orders with the serene confidence of someone who believes she has invented consequences. Now there was a quiet diligence among the men in 7-pointed stars that did not respond to her beckon, as she had imagined. She meant to ride it and discover later why wolves dislike being saddled. Margaery had other saddles. She sent for Brienne not to instruct but to confide, which is a coin rarer and more dangerous. The queen-to-be sat in a high-windowed room with 2 girls winding skeins of gold thread with their hands held just so, thumbs aligned, the thread pooling in their small palms like stranded sunlight. Margaery's hair was pinned close at the nape, her neck long and bare. She looked for a moment like the figure in an altar niche. When she turned her head, the worldly girl returned to her with offense at being compared to marble. "My grandmother says you cannot build a garden in a city," she said. "She says cities rot gardens from the roots up. And if you mean to have roses, you must bring them in under cover and teach them to drink different water. I told her you cannot have a realm without a capital, and you cannot have a capital without a people who feel the king is not a ghost." She sighed and asked if I had ever attempted to plant common sense in stone. "Then, I have planted my feet," Brienne said. "The stone learned my name." Margaery's mouth softened. "The boy likes you." She let the words sit with their own weight. "He sleeps better when you sit outside his door. It is not only the waking he fears, it is the dreaming, too." "I cannot guard him in his dreams," Brienne said. And the confession sat in her chest like a bright grief. "No," Margaery said. "But he wakes and hears your cloak when you stand, and the ring of your boot on the stone, and he does not fear the dark is empty." Brienne said nothing. "There are gifts that cannot be acknowledged without being broken. Cersei will make a move against me soon," Margaery said in the same voice she might have used to say, "It would rain on a saint's day." "She has not the talent to wait forever. When she does, she will use the faith because she thinks the faith are mad for the taste of our blood, and she will enjoy gifting them the cup. If I ask you then to guard him and not me, will you do it?" "Then?" "Yes," Brienne said. They did not dress it in others' words. The 2 girls winding thread looked up, their fingers still moving, their eyes briefly too solemn for their years. News from the road came the way it always does, in bursts, and then starved stretches, and in the same ink that speaks of grain prices and the sighting of a comet seen by a lonely man on an empty night who must tell someone. Strongbor sent a scrap stained with grease that said, "The inn at the crossroads has a man with a nose like a crescent chipped and an ear gone who wears a hood and calls for ale in a voice too low to be a man who wishes to be remembered. He was seen with a girl who has the brittle look of one who has loved her hair and made it suffer." Hyle's hand, in a different ink and cleaner, wrote beneath, "He is not the hound, he is the memory of a story of the hound. The girl is not the girl we seek. She is the shadow of our longing. We will go on. The Septon Maribald says, we will find the truth in fields, if we look at men's hands, and not their faces." Strongbor adds that the Septon has feet like a saint, and hounds that dislike him less than he deserves. Brienne read it at the table in the room where she kept her lists, and she let out a breath she had not intended to make a sound. Podrick watched her with the intentness of a cat. "We will find the truth," he said in a rush, as if he were confessing that he had broken something and was trying to fix it with words. "We will try," she said. "That is the part that is ours." He nodded so hard it made his hair flitter. "I sharpened your other sword," he told her hurriedly. "The one you won off the hedge with the heart-shaped hilt. The edge was tired of its work." "So are we all," Brienne said. And he grinned. On the morning of the archers' feast, the sky stood like boiled linen over the city, and heat lay under it like a threat. Brienne set the watch herself, and set herself where she could be seen by the boy the moment he looked up from his trencher. Tommen made a brave attempt not to be gluttonous with sugared almonds, and failed. She decided not to make a mark of it upon his soul when he already bore too many. The archers wore their guild hoods with the exaggerated care of men who have been given a uniform for the first time, and the master drew his bow with a flourish that made men clap as if they had never seen an arrow fly straight. When the boy rose to leave, a singer near the dais began a tune that wanted to be a hymn, and was somehow not. His voice cracked on the high note, and mended itself with an honesty that made the tune better than it had any reason to be. Brienne felt the hair on her forearms stir under the leather. She did not know whether that was a blessing or only weather. After the feast, a messenger came with ink still wet enough to smear at the edges. Jaime had taken a ford with less loss than his scouts had argued would be necessary, by paying the miller with flour and letting the man believe the idea had been his. He wrote that men forgive small thefts more easily if you return them different, and that this was a discovery he wished he'd made when he was 15. He added, as if embarrassed at the sentiment, "Tell the boy to learn the feel of a horse that does not obey, as he will meet many such in life." Brienne folded the letter and considered telling Tommen, and then decided she would not deliver it as a lesson on a day when he had eaten too many almonds, and then been ashamed of it alone in a small room. She told him later, at the hour when a boy's mind is most like a room with a candle in it, and the shadows are still friendly. He listened as if it were the last story of a night that had had a good many better ones, and then asked if horses could be taught to like you, even if you were not good at liking them back. She said yes. It was the truth, and also the right thing to teach. Strongbow wrote again from the river. They had found the wine shop woman with the fondness for calling men dogs, and discovered she had a son with a twisted foot who told them everything because Strongbow had made him laugh with his eyebrows. They had followed the riverboat with the mate who remembered nothing, and remembered enough to take a groat for a lie, and found nothing on the first day, and a boy with a thing like a knife lace on the second. They had gone on to a septry where men did not speak their names, and dug potatoes until their hands blistered, and their pride became something else. Hyle added that Strongbow's snoring made every dog in earshot love him and hate him in equal measure. On the third day after that, a warrior's son came to the gate of the Red Keep and asked to see the Lord Commander. He had the look of a man who has eaten indigestion in place of bread for many years, and made peace with it. Sir Theomore stood in the yard with his gauntlets in his belt, and the scar beneath his eye a little pinker in the heat. He did not bow. He inclined his head with a spareness that was its own courtesy. "Sir," he said, "the Queen Regent has sent to us with an—" He paused. He was not a fool. "An inquiry." She would know whether a queen may be questioned as an ordinary woman in certain matters of fidelity, and whether the faith is bound to render service to the crown, or only to God when the crown's will is a knife against God's throat. It would have been easier had he sneered. Because he did not, Brienne found her temper still. "What did you tell her?" "That the faith serves God," he said, "and that if she would have the service of our hands, she must be content to find our eyes upon her when she asks for them upon others." He looked at her evenly, and she saw in his face the curiosity of a man who wonders what a white cloak worn by a woman might mean to his understanding of sin and virtue. "You and yours," he asked bluntly, "would you keep blades sheathed if we came to question her grace the Queen to be with our own? Or would you kill us cleanly and later ask the crone to excuse you for it?" "I would keep my oath," Brienne said. "We do not draw steel in the king's presence save to guard his life. We do not let others draw it for other purposes in that presence either. If you come to question the queen in the king's hall with swords on your hips, I will ask you to leave them behind and your zeal with them. If you mean to arrest a queen, do not do it where a child must watch." He listened, as if her words were the only thing he would be given to eat that day. "You are the kind of honest that makes men wish to be better," he said finally. And he looked away at once, ashamed of giving a compliment and receiving grace for it. "But we are all held by hands not ours, sir. Tell your king that God loves him. Tell him also that men do not, and that is a fact, like a stone. He must learn to step around it without breaking his ankle. Then bow." When he had gone, Hyle said with the reckless accuracy that got him into trouble, "Circe will have them tie a rope of their own around their neck, and then kick the stool and cry out that it was God's foot did it. Then it will be God's foot she curses when she swings," Strongbor said cheerfully. "And that will be a day full of hymns." "Enough," Brienne said. To speak thus in the yard was to make the walls remember. The heat broke that night in a rain that came in a straight gray sheet and fell without wind or thunder, as if the sky had given up after holding too much and had decided to put it all down gently. Brienne stood in it at the top of the stair and let it drip from her chin. The city hissed. The oil in the hinges at the gate grew sweet and slick again. The smell of meat rose up from the poorer quarters and made the rain itself taste of tallow. She went to the white book room soaked to the waist and did not trouble the servants to light extra candles. She turned a blank page with wet fingers and thought of writing. Kept her oath today also. She did not. The rain said all the words anyone should be allowed on such a night. The next day, early, a raven came from Strongbor that said, "Your girl was never at the inn. All girls are each other at such inns. But we found a man who knew a man who carried a coin with the 7-pointed star punched upon it, as a man will punch it when he has been given a zeal, and wishes to spend it as a reason. He bought drink for sailors with it, and asked about which ships would carry a man north for cheap, if he could not pay with another coin that did not tell of God." Hyle wrote beneath, "The man we sought left the city by land, but the talkers we should fear now go by water. If you quarrel with the faith, be certain you have a boat of your own." She took the message to Marguerite and found her with the 2 girls gone and a man in a green and gold doublet standing at the back of the room, pretending his hands had not learned to strangle a dove once when he was 9. It was her father, Mace Tyrell, all garnished fullness and a discreet bead of sweat at his temple. He bowed to Brienne as if he had always liked to bow to women and been misunderstood about it. Marguerite's look at him was affectionate and exasperated both. A daughter's look in any house with a large garden. "Lord Commander," Mace said, "you are a tower of iron given legs." "Thank you, my lord," Brienne said, standing with all the politeness she could wring from herself. "Father," Marguerite said, "the Lord Commander would know if it is true that men under our roof bear the 7-pointed star upon their knives more boldly than they did 2 weeks ago." "Why should they not?" Mace asked, startled into honesty. "It is fashionable. The faith is with us. The small folk like to see a sign that tells them the ones above them know there is a God. It saves them the trouble of deciding if there is one themselves. And if those same men march at another's will, when that will turns against us," Marguerite said. Mace laughed. A rolling sound. "Then we do what we always do, my darling. We put flowers upon our helmets and cut the weeds down." Brienne made her voice flat enough to be a plank. "Your Grace," she said to Marguerite deliberately. "I would have your leave to remove certain men from the Red Keep's night watches, if they bear the stars you speak of on their blades." "You have it," Marguerite said at once, quick and clean. Mace blinked and then remembered to look proud. He went away to be important in a different room. Loris came on his own feet to the yard 2 days after that, pale and careful as a boy who has been told to carry water in a loaf of bread and not spill. He brought no sword. He stood under the olive tree and watched Brienne teach Hyle to fall properly and get up without making an enemy of the ground. And when she had finished, he spoke where all could hear, because he did not mean asking to be a private act. "Brienne," he said, Sir Loras, she said, I cannot be a Kingsguard who guards with a blade. Yet, he said, but I can be one who guards with his eyes, and knows where the blade should be, and can tell you so without the envy that rots men who have had their hands tied to their own pride. His voice almost broke. He held it. Set me to the doors that require a man you can trust to see without being seen. She looked at him and saw a boy who had grown into a man too quickly, and then been asked to grow again in a direction he had not planned. You will stand at the queen's door when she walks from her chamber to the hall, she said. You will count those who walk with her, and tell me who looks away when the faith's men pass, and who looks too long. You will carry no sword on those mornings. You will carry the knowledge that you chose it. He bowed. It was not beautiful. It was unflinching. Cersei watched that exchange from a balcony, because she watched everything for the opportunity to discover hatred in it. She smiled with all her teeth as if someone had told her a secret that she meant to be the first to roast. When Brienne went up later by the west stair, she found the Queen Regent in a corridor smelling of lavender and old dust, her hand upon a pillar as if she meant to steady the tower with it by spite. You think you have a victory, she said softly. You think the city is yours because its stones have begun to learn your weight. You think the boy breathes because you wish it. You think the faith will hate me enough to love you. She leaned forward. Her eyes were clear as ice over a river. You understand nothing about women who have learned to be alone in a bed that owed them a king. I understand oaths, Brienne said, and the difference between a vow and a whim. Cersei smiled as if someone had performed a trick for her and disappointed her. You think you will keep him from me? You will not. Not you, not your crippled lover who can no longer wield the sword he thinks is his soul. I will make the city a prayer, and prayers make men stupid enough to do what they are told. You will break on that stupidity or be broken with it. I will keep him safe, Brienne said. It was not a threat and not a plea. It felt like setting a stone down in the place where it had always meant to live. When she left the queen, the corridor felt cooler. She breathed slowly until the pulse in her neck remembered itself. Podrick came running and half stopped, uncertain whether to bow or speak or both. Sir, he said, breathless. The river captain says a man with a torn ear was seen with a black-bearded courier on the quays at the hour before dawn. The courier's horse wore a white tassel as if... He stopped, unsure, as if he wished men to notice the tassel and not his face. Brienne finished for him. White for what? A house? A faith? Some men wear colors like armor and do not understand that armor makes them heavy. Podrick nodded, words lining up behind his teeth, then spilling. The captain said the courier asked him if there was such a thing as a ferry that did not stop for prayer. And when he laughed, the courier told him God listens better when men do not turn their heads. He paid in coin with a maiden on it that has a nick like a smile. The captain says he would know the nick if he held the coin blind. Mentor, find him, she said. No noise. If we catch a thread, we follow it to the loom and cut the cloth there. Podrick ran. She went to the white book and stood with her hands upon it until the heat in her body had gone out through her palms and left her able to think. She wrote nothing. She shut it and went down to the yard and took up a practice sword and made Hyle hold his shield the way a man does when his hand is tired and his spirit worse. She drove him back 3 steps and then let him come, and did not punish him for the relief that came into his eyes. Relief is a thing to notice in a man. It tells you where he will break and where to hold him instead. That night, she slept in the chair outside Tommen's door with her cloak around her shoulders, an oathkeeper against her knee. The boy woke twice, once with a sound that had not finished being a cry, and then with a quiet so deep she had to lean toward it to know he was awake. The first time he asked if kings go to the stranger first, and then to the father, or in the other order. The second time he asked if she would leave. She said no both times, and the second time he went back to sleep as if the word had been a lullaby taught to him before he was born. In the morning, Strongbor was back, filthy and pleased with it, with Hyle at his shoulder looking less pleased and more proud. They came up the stone steps 2 at a time, tracking dried road mud that made the servants hiss like cats. and bowed in the doorway with a crash of scabbards against the doorframe. "We found a man with a coin with a nick like a girl's joke," Strongbor said without preamble. He had it from another man who had it from a third, and so on, until the story became something an old woman told about her neighbor's pig. "But the nick is true." The coin was struck in Old Town from a die that had been marred and not replaced. Every man who held it laughed when he saw it, and then stopped laughing because those who keep such coins do not like to be laughed at. Hyle took it up smoothly. "The courier is a man who wears the colors others wear at him. He spoke with a lord steward at the quays who thought himself a lord. He spent money like a man who means to have a purse when he is aged. He went to the sept to sleep on the cold stones, and then left a candle burning at the mother's feet when he went, which suggests a woman who has forgiven him for something, and made him thank a statue for the lesson. He took the North Road. If he carries any message, it is to make trouble between those with roses and those with lions painted upon their favorite cups." "You think he is Cersei's man?" Brienne said. Hyle tipped his head, acknowledging that guess and adding to it with a shrug, "Or a man who wishes to be mistaken for one. The cheapest treasons yield the best confusions." Strongbor grinned. "I like this game. May we play it with someone's teeth soon?" "You may not," Brienne said. "Then I will drink until my teeth forget they wish to be used." Strongbor replied, perfectly content. "Tell me when I may be made useful. I am like a barrel that must be rolled if it is not to rot." "Wash," she said, "and sleep. Then stand with Swan at the queen's table with your hands folded and your mouth shut, and see which men fidget. Give me their names later and the manner of their rings, and whether they eat with their right hand or their left, as a man will, because he has not learned to lie with his fingers yet." "Man." He saluted, which on him looked like a tavern joke done with a saint's good humor, and went away singing something about a girl with too many brothers. Hyle lingered in the doorway. "You will not keep him if you do not give him work that feels like a fight," he said. "I have already given him such," Brienne said. "He just cannot smell the blood on it yet." Hyle's mouth joined in the smallest collusion with her own. "You are learning to make words do as much as swords." "No," she said. "I am learning to sit still long enough to let them work." When he had gone, she stood a long time looking at the table where her lists lay, thinking of the North Road and coins nicked by accident, and men who make themselves into colors because they do not know how to be men. She thought of the way the Faith's boys watched her, not with lust, but with a harder thing. The way a man looks at a blade he would like to own and is angry it is not made for his hand. She thought of Cersei's calm when she spoke of using God the way one uses a stool to reach a jug upon a high shelf. The thing happened as she had known it would, on a day of thin clouds and no wind, when candles sputtered and could not decide they would burn straight or throw smoke. It happened in the morning with a flurry of bells that sounded not like a glory, but like spoons dropped one after another on a hard floor. An untidy clatter that made every head turn at once and look in too many directions. The warriors' sons came up the steps of the great sept, with their heads bare, and their eyes hard, and their swords at their hips, as if they meant to show the mother and the father, and all the rest that their steel had been blessed by the act of its being carried in plain sight. They asked courteously to see the queen. They spoke not to Brienne but to the gold-cloaked captain who loved to be addressed. The captain turned to look for Brienne with the look of a man who intends to tell a woman he has done a thing for her own good, without asking her what the good is. Margaery stood in the hall with her hair not yet braided, the longest tendrils lying along her collarbones, in a way that would have made a less practiced woman blush. Her mouth did not tremble. Her grandmother was not there. Her father had found a meeting that required him to be somewhere else. Men have a genius for it. The High Septon had sent Theomore and 3 others of his thin, spare mate. They held their zeal like a thing that could be extinguished by a breath. "Her Grace is at prayer," Brienne said, because Margaery had told her last night in that quiet, measured room that if the day came the first answer would be that she had given her soul to God and that men must wait upon it. "You may wait in the hall without your swords." Theomore inclined his head and unbuckled his belt. He placed his sword in his hands and held it up in the posture of offering, palms flat, fingers open. It held a gravity that made the gold cloaks look briefly ashamed of their own hilts. Theomore laid the blade upon a bench without a show. 2 of his companions did the same. The third, young, his beard still the kind that grows as if it would prefer to be hair in a different place, hesitated, looking past Brienne to the queen, who was not visible, and then over Brienne's shoulder, as if some man there could rescue him from the humiliating thought of doing as he was told by a woman. Brienne did not move. She waited. Theomore's knuckles made a small sound upon the bench. The young one put his sword down abruptly and flushed as if a girl had seen him naked by a river. They waited. Marguerite came out of the side door that led from the small chapel, her hands folded in front of her. There was no oil upon her brow, but there might as well have been. She had made her face into a courtesy and a wall, and a clean mirror held to the men before her. She went first to the king and touched his shoulder and smiled into his anxious eyes. Then she turned to the warriors' sons and the small court, and the hall that had gathered itself like a spring ready to leap. "You may ask what you like," she said. "The mother hears me when I speak, and hears you also when you are silent, and listens to the thing in a man's heart that he does not know is there, until it comes out of his mouth. I have no fear of that. But you will not take me from this hall as if I were a thief brought to be weighed in the market. I am the queen-to-be in the sight of gods and men, and the boy's love for me is not a thing you can make him ashamed of only to please a woman who hates me." She did not turn her head toward Circe, who was not in the hall, because even in her absence she held a kind of attention that had to be refused, or it would take your breath from you. Theomore bowed, that spare bob of the head again. "We are bound," he said, "to seek the truth when we are told there is sin." "Seek," Marguerite said, "but do not pretend you seek only mine." Brienne stood at her right shoulder and did not rest her hand upon Oathkeeper's hilt, because there are times when a hand upon a hilt is the wrong story to tell. The gold cloaks discovered, suddenly, that their halberds were very heavy and that their feet made a rattle upon the floor if they shifted. They stood very still. Tommen looked from face to face with the expression of a boy, asked to choose which way the cart should go when both wheels had already sunk to the axle. Balançoine breathed out, slow, a small release like a man putting down a weight he had forgotten he did not have to carry. The questioning began. It was like a rain of very small stones. Theomore asked no lewd things. He asked what days of what month, and which women sat with her when she took her bath, and whether she had walked in the garden at an hour when gardeners could see, and whether any man had gone before her into a certain room, and whether there had been bread at the meal, and how old the bread had been, and whether she had smiled at a particular joke told by a particular cousin in a corner that had not been in shadow. Marguerite answered without anger. She named the women who bathed with her and would prove it. She named the gardeners, and 2 of them, uncertain and very brave, stepped forward with earth under their nails, and bowed and said her smile had been the kind a queen gives to men who grow her roses, not the other kind men dream of when they are young and think every kindness means a knight. She named the bread, and the baker stepped forward, sweating, and said he knew the loaf because his boy had burnt the first and cried all morning. Brienne watched. She watched the faces more than the words. One of the Faith's young men had a fervor that shook his upper lip. One of the cousins had a serenity that had been bought at the price of never telling the truth about his own desires. A hand shook when a cup was passed. A woman in the back, a cousin of a cousin, could not stop pinching her own sleeve as if the cloth might break and give her a hole to fall through. Brienne counted the openings in the hall's lattice where a bow might be fitted. She judged the distance to the door where a man might run if he meant to make a spectacle. She measured the courage of Tommen's small hand when he reached for Marguerite's sleeve and did not tug, only rested, and how Marguerite did not pretend it had not happened but laid her fingers over his and patted very lightly once, as if soothing a falcon that might fly at any suddenness. It did not end that day because nothing that means anything ends in a day. Theomore bowed again, unreadable. "We will seek further," he said, "as we must, because men come to us with paper words that burn like nettles in their hands, and we cannot refuse to take them." He glanced briefly at Brienne, not with collusion and not without it. "We will return." They went. Their swords returned to them at the door like servants summoned. and the hall exhaled all at once, as if the city itself had been holding its breath by proxy. Tommen burst into tears that were not noisy, and therefore worse. Margaery took him away by a private stair that had been built for a king's mistress 100 years ago. It is strange how the good is ungenerous with itself, and the bad makes doorways that can be used by anyone. Balon turned to Brienne, and looked as if he meant to speak, and then did not. That night, Brienne did not open the white book. She cleaned Oathkeeper silently with a cloth and oil, until the smoky grain of the steel lay like a river in winter, and then she set it down and folded her cloak, and sat in the chair, until the candle burned to a stub. She slept after the candle died, which is a trick of men who must be ready to wake. The moment before dawn she opened her eyes because the tower told her to, and because the world is not the sort of place to let a woman keep a day without making her pay it back. There was a letter under the door. No hand's name, no seal, no scent. The hand was small and careful, as if a child had been taught to write this one thing, and then was never asked to write again. The words said, "There are truths that wear a different face when you look at them from the side. If the queen-to-be has sin, let it be named in God's house, and not the market. If she has none, let it be so named. If you love the boy, and you do, you will not let his life be made a window where men shout their prayers through. Tell her to go to the sept at the hour after dawn wearing no jewels. Bring no swords. If the faith means to make a show, they will do it best if you bring them the stage. If they do not, all men will know who brought the actors and who did not." Brienne read it twice and then a third time to see what her skin felt that her eyes could not find. The paper trembled very slightly in her fingers, and she made herself put it down and hold the table edge to still the shaking, because a Lord Commander cannot be seen to tremble at paper. She went to Margaery. The girl sat in her shift by the window with her hair loose, as if she had decided she would keep its modesty to herself, since men were determined to take it. She listened without speaking and then laughed once, very softly, that little chime of irony she used when she must continue to be brave. "Of course," she said. "We will bring them their stage and take their audience from them." "No swords," Brienne said. "No swords," Margaery agreed. "But I will have my grandmother's eyes upon me, and men have bled out of rooms for fear of those when no blade touched them." At the hour after dawn the city had the look it gets after rain when the puddles still hold sky, and the gutters still hold secrets. The great sept steps were washed. The candles were lit. The high septon was not in evidence. This was a day for smaller men to practice being large. Brienne went plain in her cloak, Oathkeeper left behind because the world must see what the world must learn. Balon Swan walked with them, with only a baton. Podrick carried nothing at all and looked as if he were carrying an ocean. Sir Theomore stood at the top of the steps, and looked down as though this were precisely what he had asked of his god, and was satisfied to be given it. He bowed. "Her Grace," he said, "you come in obedience. We will question in obedience." Margaery went past him without needing to be invited. The marble father stared down with his blind stone eyes. The mother smiled her stone smile. The warrior held his blade up with a hand that had been white for 100 years. The benches had been filled with witnesses already, as if chance had gathered the city's curiosity and tied it in bundles at the door. They asked the questions again, and again the answers landed like small stones upon the tile. And again there was nothing to lift up and say, "This is the thing. Here is the proof. Close your hand and feel its shape." They brought a boy who said he had seen the queen laughing high at a window, with a man who was not her husband, and then could not say which window. The way windows in the keep look to men whose only windows have been made of wool. They brought a woman who hated Margaery as one hates the girl she has been asked to resemble, and could not, and the sourness came off her like a smell read in a bad book. They brought a groom who said he had seen her pass at dawn with her hair down like a wife. He trembled. Theomore, to his credit, asked him how many wives he had seen at dawn, and how many queens. The groom burst into tears, and could not be made to stop. Theomore looked at Brienne once, briefly, again, as if to apologize for the poverty of the meal he had been forced to serve. Cersei did not come. Her absence sat in the place where her body would have been, palpable as heat over a fireless hearth. Theomore ended it when the candles burned down, and the day had become the kind that lies heavy upon the skin. We will seek further, he said again. For men sometimes remember truths at night that their pride buried in the noon. We will come again. He looked at the boy. Your Grace, remember that the father loves justice and the mother loves mercy, and the two do not hold hands as often as we pretend. On the steps afterward, a small commotion gathered on the lower landings where bread sellers and beggars and hucksters of salvation meet. A man had been caught with his hand in a girl's purse, and the girl had him by the hair, and he had a knife, and a warrior's son had taken the knife with such economy it barely looked like an act. The thief shouted that he had only meant to take what was his by ancient right, and who was anyone to say which coin belonged to whom? The crowd loved that. They will always cheer for a thief who makes poetry of his theft. Brienne stepped down 2 treads and the crowd parted the way water does when it touches a rock it fears to bruise itself upon. She looked at the man's hand. It had no marks of work. His knife was too clean. His ear was whole. She saw no story in him that would be worth remembering tomorrow. She took the girl's purse and gave it back to the girl and told the man to go away and be poor somewhere where no one wished to watch. And he spat, and 2 lads kicked him as he fled, and the city felt better for a breath. Do you enjoy it? Marguerite asked beside her, her voice very low. No, Brienne said, but it is sometimes the cleanest choice among dirty ones. They climbed back to the keep in a quiet that was not ease, and in the corridor at the top of the stair, Jaime was waiting for them, travel-stained and thinner by choice, the gold hand tucked into his belt, like a thing a man might take off when it was time to be serious. He looked at Brienne as if to say, I was afraid for you, and will not insult your courage by speaking it. He looked at Marguerite as if to say, you are braver than my sister believes and unluckier than you deserve. He looked at the boy and smiled the way men smile at small kings who have not yet learned they cannot order the weather. You have come back early, Brienne said, because it was easier than saying the other things. The Riverlands can spare me long enough to watch a woman drown another in piety, he said, all mildness with the edge under it. Have I missed the singing? Not yet, Marguerite said, but the choir is tuning. She smiled at him with genuine liking. He returned it, real and rueful. They went to the White Book Room because Jaime always went there first when he came to the city if he did not go to his sister, and because Brienne had made it hers and had not asked permission, and because Marguerite liked the way the room held quiet, even when men came to argue. Tommen, with a new courage, followed without needing his mother's hand to tell him where to put his feet. He lay his palm on the cover as if to feel how the names burned there. Jaime stood by the window and looked out at the city. They are building gallows in their hearts, he said conversationally. It is a labor most men enjoy. And you? Brienne asked. I have learned to be a man with a rope and no neck for it, he said. It is a peculiar freedom. They stood, and the light went to gold in the room, and someone in the city began to sing the wrong hymn in a voice that made it almost right. The day closed its hands slowly, and the names in the book kept being themselves without asking anyone's leave. That night Brienne wrote nothing. She lay on the stone before the boy's door and slept in armor, and woke twice at nothing, and once at Podrick's soft foot, and once with the precise, humorless intuition that the day to come would demand a greater generosity from her than any sword stroke ever had. It did. In the morning, Cersei moved. She had found a man who enjoyed being used the way a knife enjoys being sharpened. Osney Kettleblack confessed to a sin he had enjoyed, and many he had not, in the manner of a man who likes to hear his own filth given the dignity of liturgy. Theomore, whose honesty had made him miserable for days, came with a face that had been forced to put on triumph, and could not do it well. Marguerite stood under the high windows with her hands folded, and her hair braided with no jewels in it, and said no, and no, and no, and no, and no until the word itself felt like a plank built across a span over water that men insisted was not there. The boy cried in private, where Brienne could hear, but would not enter. Because there are doors even a white cloak may not pass, and remain what she is. Your Grace, Brienne said to the king when at last Marguerite was taken to the sepcell with the respect due to a queen and the indifference due to a prisoner. You must sit on the throne this day. The city must see you sit. I cannot, he whispered. Without her. You can. Brienne said, and said it with a steadiness that taught the room to be quiet around it. "We will bring you to it and stand where you can see us and where you cannot. A king's sitting is not a man's ease, it is a city's spine." She took his hand and set it where his fingers found the feel of wood smoothed by centuries of other boys' sweat. She saw his throat work. She let go. Jaime walked beside the boy like a man who had learned he could guard with presence as well as with blade, and had come to like the work after years of pretending he despised it. Balin took the steps a pace ahead and looked to each side as a man looks to see if a field will bear. Strongbor stood the length of a spear away from Cersei and folded his arms and thought about beer and did not yawn. Hyle took the cup from the hand of the man who passed it and looked into it and passed it on, and never once made a jest about poison. Brienne stood, and the white cloak made her into a word. The boy sat. The city, which loves a boy, remembered how to be a people and not a crowd, which is a day's victory worth writing down in a place no book keeps. In the evening she stood on the tower and saw the gulls fight and make grace and fight again, and then drop to the water like fallen handkerchiefs until the next gust lifted them. She went to the book and wrote, finally, a line that would hold. Guarded the king while the queen-to-be was taken to the sept for questioning. Gave no sword to God and took none from men, and kept the peace between those who wished to break it with their righteousness. She sanded it and shut the book and sat with her head in her hands. Podrick brought her a cup of watered wine and did not speak. The city sighed. Somewhere. Someone sang the wrong hymn again and made it move through her like a river under ice. She did not sleep. She stood at the door. She stood at the edge of a very large thing and did not ask it for mercy. On the second day, when the faith came again to ask questions, and the boy asked to go with the queen-to-be and be one body with her, as if that could make innocence a bodily thing. And on the third, when Cersei came into the hall with her mouth made of knives, and discovered the knives were dull against a woman who would not lift her voice to bleed at them. And on the day after that, when Jaime laughed her that, when Jaime laughed her that, when Jaime laughed her that. Rye, and if we do not, the worst stories will at least not have us in them. And on the night after that, when a raven brought news that a grave digger somewhere in the quiet isle had a way of moving that reminded a dog of a man. And on the morning after that, when Balin Swan told her the coin with the nick had shown up in the hand of a beggar who had been given it by a woman, with a veil who said she wished to pay a debt without being seen. On all those days, Brooke, when at last the High Septon himself required the queen-to-be to submit to a trial, not by 7, which she would have chosen because gods love symmetry, but by judges soft or hard as their breakfasts, Brienne went to Margaery and found her alone for the first time in a week. The girl looked younger than she had in years, which is a thing that happens to women when they are no longer permitted to wear the armor that has made them old. "I will stand at the door," Brienne said. "I know," Margaery said. "If they move to take you as if you were a pig, we will spoil the knife." Margaery's mouth shaped a smile that hurt them both. "I will make them call me lady while they do it," she said. "And you will make them afraid to forget. That is all we are, in the end. The fear we make and the comfort we give. It is a poor thing to build a world on, but it is what we have." "Renly would have made it better with a jest," Brienne said. "Renly would have wept and hidden it with a jest," Margaery corrected, soft as a mother. "And he would have been beautiful, and it would have done no good at all. He needed you. He did not know how to ask for you. I will not make that mistake. Now." Brienne made a motion that might have been a bow if her neck could remember how. "I will be there," she said. "And when it is done," Margaery said, with that small iron in her again, "if I am free, we will sit and eat bread without sweetness and without complaint, and we will talk of the fields in the reach where wheat comes up thick and foolish. And if I am not free, you will guard him, and he will learn to sit without me, and he will forgive me the leaving. In either story, your line in the book remains true." "Dah." She went to the white book that night, like a penitent and not like a lord. She opened to the page that held her single sentence and touched her hand to it lightly, and did not pray because prayer requires asking for something, and she had already asked what she could ask, and to ask more would be greed. She closed it and sat very still until the candle burned down, and Podrick's soft foot came once, and then again, and then did not come a third time, because the boy had fallen asleep on the other side of the door with his crown beside him, on the floor like a toy, and she could not bear to wake him for the dignity of furniture. When morning came, she buckled her greaves without Podrick's help, because she had meant him to sleep. She set the cloak across her shoulders and pinned it with fingers that had knotted 1,000 laces, and fumbled none. She walked the corridor with the particular gait she had developed for the white. Nothing of swagger, nothing of apology. A calm that asked the stone to find its level around her weight. Jaime met her at the turning and nodded once, his mouth quirky, as if he meant to say something wicked, and had discovered he could no longer do wickedness with his tongue the way he once had. "Do you remember the smell of apple oil and velvet?" he said suddenly, surprising her. "Yes," she said more quickly than she would have liked. "Then we are not lost," he said. He touched her shoulder with the gold hand as if it had learned to be gentle, and then he went away as if he had not offered her a blessing. They took the queen bee to the Septai. They took the boy to the hall. They took Brienne's breath and gave it back to her in measured pieces all day long. When Theomore asked his last question, and bowed for the last time, and said the words that men say when they mean to declare that a woman is to be tested by men who have given themselves permission to do harm, Brienne stood and felt the city's attention swing, like a great lantern on a ship in heavy weather. The ship did not capsize. The lantern made a circle of light where she stood, and the sea beyond the circle did what seas do. That night, when the hall was empty at last, she went to the white book and did not open it. She stood with her hands on the cover and laid her head down upon the leather and let the cool of it seep into her cheek. She thought of the reef at evenfall and the way a wave spends itself without hatred upon something that will not be moved. She thought of a woman's hands winding gold thread. She thought of a boy's hand upon her sleeve, light as a bird that has decided, just for a breath, that a human wrist is a safe perch. She stood for a very long time like that, and the city, which never sleeps, went on with its stealthy industriousness around her. The changing of the watch, the lifting of a bucket, the laughter when a joke landed late but sweet, the tearing of bread, the hiss of a kettle, the beginning of a song about some ancient love that had not ended with a sword, but with a door shut gently in a night where rain did not fall. And she kept her oath.